You ever notice how Star Wars loves to tell us about the Chosen One, the prophecy kid, the destiny boy, the guy who was basically doomed before he could even grow a proper beard? Yeah, that's Anakin in a nutshell. But here's the thing, hiding right behind him in the shadows is another fall that's so much heavier, so much more real, and yet nobody talks about it. Count Dooku. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dooku, the tall guy with the fancy curved lightsaber, and the voice like he just walked out of a Shakespeare play. The guy who shows up, duels some Jedi, then gets his head chopped off, like a disposable video game boss. But that's the surface story, the bare-bones version. The reality of Dooku's fall is way more complex, and honestly, way more heartbreaking than Anakin's entire meltdown. Because here's the twist. Anakin was basically a walking red flag from day one. Impulsive, angry, constantly whining about sand, and never listening to anyone. Palpatine didn't have to try very hard to flip him, just offered him power and some bedtime stories about saving Padma. Dooku fell because he believed he was right, because he thought he was saving the galaxy from corruption and decay. That's not just tragic, that's chilling, and it gets worse the more you think about it. The Republic really was falling apart, the Jedi really were blind, and Dooku really was the only one bold enough to call them out. But instead of being remembered as a reformer, he gets painted as some cartoon villain. Meanwhile, we spend endless hours watching Anakin sulk and scream about not getting a seat on the council. Like, priorities, people. The funny part is, if you dropped Dooku into any office job, he'd be the guy who calls out management for running the company into the ground, then quits in a dramatic speech. But instead of starting a podcast, like a normal disillusioned man, he went and teamed up with Space Satan. It's one of those choices that feels logical in the moment, but looks insane from the outside. And that's what makes his story so fascinating. In this video, we're breaking down why Dooku's fall is the real tragedy of Star Wars, why it hits harder than Anakin's, and why it deserves way more attention than it gets. We'll look at his disillusionment, his battles, his manipulations, and his downfall. And by the end, you might just realize that the most heartbreaking fall in the galaxy wasn't the Chosen One's, it was the one nobody ever chose to notice. Everyone knows Anakin's fall, the forbidden love, the rage-filled visions, the betrayal on Mustafar, but what about Count Dooku? Why is his story so often ignored when it's arguably even more compelling? The curiosity comes from the fact that unlike Anakin, Dooku wasn't some reckless prodigy, blinded by passion. He was a wise, disciplined Jedi master who saw the truth and decided the Jedi weren't what they claimed to be. Think about it. Dooku was once Yoda's apprentice, one of the most respected Jedi in the galaxy, and a man trusted with guiding younglings and teaching the next generation. He wasn't some impulsive teenager. He was a statesman, a warrior, and a philosopher rolled into one. So what makes a man like that walk away from everything he believed in? We get glimpses of it in Tales of the Jedi. You see him questioning the council. You see him frustrated at their blindness to corruption, and you realize his turn didn't happen overnight. It was a slow unraveling, a steady disillusionment that ate at him piece by piece. That's a far more relatable kind of fall, because it's not about destiny or prophecy, it's about losing faith in institutions you once trusted. And that's what makes it fascinating. Unlike Anakin, whose story is steeped in myth and cosmic prophecy, Dooku's fall feels grounded, even human. He wasn't tricked into darkness overnight. He chose it after years of seeing the cracks in the system. It's the kind of story that makes you stop and ask, would I have made the same choice if I saw what he saw? The curiosity of Dooku's journey is that it invites us to dig deeper, to explore the grey areas where good intentions twist into dangerous outcomes. And that's what makes his story so tragically compelling. The most frustrating part of Dooku's story is how little the films actually give us. In Attack of the Clones, he shows up, gives a couple speeches, and suddenly he's the leader of the Separatists. No context, no nuance, just boom, evil aristocrat with a curved lightsaber. Meanwhile, the prequels bend over backward to spell out every detail of Anakin's emotional spiral. It's maddening, because when you look at what we learn later in the Clone Wars and Tales of the Jedi, Dooku's motivations are way richer than the movies ever hinted at. He wasn't fighting because he wanted to dominate the galaxy, he was fighting because he thought the Republic was collapsing under its own weight. And here's the kicker, he wasn't wrong. The Republic was corrupt, the Senate was bought, and the Jedi were compromised by their own complacency. There's a deep sorrow in Dooku's story, because at its heart, it's about a man who believed he was saving the galaxy and ended up destroying himself. He wasn't driven by love or anger like Anakin, he was driven by disillusionment. He looked at the Republic, saw the corruption choking it, and realized the Jedi were too blind to fix it. That realization broke him. What makes it even sadder is that he never truly abandoned his ideals. In his mind, he was still fighting for peace, still trying to bring order to chaos. The separatist movement he championed wasn't born out of pure greed, was a coalition of worlds tired of being ignored and exploited. Dooku gave them a voice, but his alliance with Sidious poisoned everything. His cause became a puppet show, and he became the puppet. Tales of the Jedi hits this sorrow hard. Watching him grieve after Qui-Gon's death, watching him clash with Yaddle, seeing him choose the path he knows is wrong but feels inevitably it's devastating. You can see the man slipping away, crushed under the weight of choices that once felt righteous. He isn't a cackling villain, he's a broken idealist, and then his death makes the sorrow unbearable. Begging Palpatine for help, realizing in that moment that he's nothing more than a disposable pawn. That look of horror as Anakin strikes him down isn't fear, it's regret. Regret that he gave everything to a master who never cared. Regret that his choices led him to that chair in front of two blades. The sorrow of Dooku's fall is that it wasn't inevitable. It wasn't destiny. It was the slow erosion of a man who believed too deeply, saw too much, and couldn't bear the weight of his own disillusionment. For all the tragedy, you can't ignore the awe Dooku inspires. He isn't just a failed Jedi, he's one of the most impressive warriors in the saga. That curved hilt lightsaber, the precision of his fencing style, the calm authority in his voice, every moment he's on screen feels elevated. He carries himself with the grace of nobility and the menace of a Sith, a rare combination. Watching him duel is awe-inspiring. Against Obi-Wan and Anakin, he dismantles them with surgical precision, making them look like amateurs. He holds his own against Yoda, a feat almost unthinkable, and does it with elegance rather than brute force. He doesn't just fight, he performs, and that aura sets him apart from every other Sith we see. Despite the darkness of his story, there's still hope in Dooku's legacy. Not hope for him personally, because his path ends in tragedy, but hope in what his story reveals to us as fans. He shows that Star Wars doesn't have to be black and white, that the most interesting characters are the ones trapped in the grey. The hope is that his fall sparks conversations about the Jedi themselves. His disillusionment forces us to question whether the Order really was as wise as it claimed. That makes Star Wars richer, because it challenges the myth of Jedi perfection and opens the door for more complex storytelling. Without Dooku, the flaws of the Council might have stayed hidden in the background. There's also hope in how newer stories are giving him the depth he deserves. Tales of the Jedi finally showed us glimpses of his inner conflict, his grief, and his doubts. That's hopeful because it means Lucasfilm is finally willing to explore the tragedy they once glossed over. Fans who dismissed him as a side villain are now starting to see the layers, and maybe the greatest hope is what his story represents in the broader saga. That even when someone falls, it doesn't erase the truths they spoke. Dooku was wrong to join Sidious, but he wasn't wrong about the Republic's corruption. His story gives hope that even the darkest arcs can carry lessons worth remembering. The hope of Dooku's tale is that it shows how tragedy can still illuminate truth, that even in his failure, there's wisdom to be gained. And that makes his legacy far more valuable than the films ever gave him credit for. In the end, Dooku's fall is one of the most tragic stories in Star Wars. Not because he was manipulated like Anakin, but because he chose his path with open eyes. He saw the flaws of the Republic, the failures of the Jedi, and the corruption that poisoned everything. And instead of walking away, he aligned himself with the one man who embodied that corruption. That's what makes it heartbreaking. Anakin's fall was inevitable, baked into prophecy and destiny, but Dooku's was avoidable. He wasn't trapped by visions or attachments. He was trapped by his own belief that he could fix a broken system by burning it down. His tragedy is that he wasn't wrong about the problem, he was wrong about the solution. The resolution of his story is brutal. Cast aside by the master he served, betrayed in the moment he thought he'd finally succeeded, and left to die with the realization that he was never more than a pawn. It's the ultimate irony, a man who saw through everyone else's lies, but never saw through power. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.